Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Given recent events and the completion of the major parts of my immigration journey, I figured I'd share with you guys how I immigrated from the US to New Zealand on a partnership-based path. A quick disclaimer, I am not a lawyer. I am sharing my own experience just to let people know what their path may look like if they go the same route I did. Make sure to check all immigration laws and speak with an immigration expert or a lawyer for advice on how you should proceed before taking any steps to immigrate. So, a little context. I am currently a 29-year-old white woman originally from Virginia, USA. I began my partnership with my partner Anthony, who is a native New Zealander, around the end of February 2019 after we'd met online through our mutual interest of doom mapping. I wanted to wait about a year before I went to go physically meet him, but we all know what happened in 2020 when that would have happened. So that plan just kind of went out the window, but we kept on with our online relationship, which honestly may have been for the better because it gave us more time to plan and research. On May 1st, 2022, the border to New Zealand finally opened, and I was one of the first people to land in New Zealand on that day. I spent 2 weeks there, and once I had ascertained that Anthony wasn't a catfish or a psychopath, I felt ready to pursue immigration. So the first step that I took actually wasn't a partnership-based visa. Because I was 26 at this point, I could qualify for a working holiday visa. This allows you to stay up to 12 months if you're a US citizen. You must be between the ages of 18 and 30. You can't take any permanent job offers, and you can study up for 6 months if that's your fancy. I mostly just needed a way into the country to apply for next steps, so this is the route that I chose to go first, as it also meant I wasn't really depending on my partner to stay here if I decided I hated his snoring or whatever and just couldn't live with him anymore. But in any case, it worked and I'm still here. It's a fairly easy application process. At the time I did it, there were no medical exams required, and it didn't take a long time to complete, but there are some documents you will need to supply. Number 1, bank statement. New Zealand requires proof that you can support yourself while you're in the country, and this will be an amount of 4,200 New Zealand dollars, or about 2,500 USD per year. And you'll also just need to be able to prove that you can afford a return ticket once your visa runs out, although hopefully, if all goes well, you won't have to actually get a return ticket. Number 2, police certificate. Currently, New Zealand requires you to provide a police certificate in order to complete background checks, and while this didn't used to be part of the process when I was doing it, it's not that hard of a process. For the US citizens, it is a identity history summary check, which is obtained through the FBI. You will need to provide fingerprints, which is a fairly easy process to go through. There's a lot of fingerprinting services out there, and also the US Post Office does this as well. So you've got a few options. And this does take a couple weeks to complete, depending on whether you send your fingerprints through snail mail, like on a piece of paper, or whether you send them digitally. So just check and see what kind of fingerprinting you're getting, but give yourself plenty of time to get this process done, although you don't want to complete it more than 6 months ahead of when you are getting ready to apply for your visa. And number 3, proof of insurance. While New Zealand will cover you for emergencies, they will not cover you for anything else, so make sure to get an insurance policy that will cover hospitalization. I personally used IMG, but there's plenty of service providers, so just be sure to read the fine print while getting insurance. Now, you may have heard me say before that you can't take any permanent work while on this visa, but not to fret, there's plenty of seasonal work and temp work, and depending on your industry and education, it's not too hard to get that kind of work, but it can also depend on the time of year and the general economy. So just be sure to look into what's available before you go. Seek is the place that I check for jobs, but there's tons of job boards available, including through Immigration New Zealand, although most of theirs is seasonal work. So yeah, that was the first big step. It took about 2 weeks tops for my visa to be approved, and I arrived in New Zealand in February of 2023. So once I got into New Zealand, I spent about 6 months living and working there. In that time, I'd also gone to the New Zealand Game Developers Conference, and my partner actually met a lawyer there who specialized in immigration. I initiated contact with my lawyer in September 2023, and from there, he assisted with getting paperwork together to gather information about myself, my partner, and the relationship we have. To make this point clear, I only signed 2 actual forms from immigration in the process of applying for this visa, as my lawyer was the one to fill out the rest of the information on behalf of me that I had provided him. I do recommend having a lawyer to do this process, but I also realize that's a fairly privileged take. So INZ does have fairly easy to understand applications if you do find yourself in a position that you can't hire a lawyer to help you with the process. And there's also like fairly hefty fees for the actual applications, so just keep that in mind when you are looking into this. But basically, here's what you'll need to succeed. Number 1, a joint bank account. And this one was slightly scary for me as I have suffered from financial abuse before, but you are going to have to prove that you and your partner are sharing expenses. I also provided transactions from my personal account to prove that I was reimbursing my partner for my portion of our rates and other household bills, as they were under his name only, and it was also just to keep everything that way until we knew I was going to be staying here forever. And literally every single piece of mail with your name on it. We don't get many bills in our mail to begin with, so this can also include things like DoorDash order receipts, package labels, basically anything to prove that you're both living at the same address, and purchases are just the easiest way to prove that. Next, there are 2 immigration forms. Form INZ 1146, which is a questionnaire your partner fills out to signal their intent of supporting your visa. And then Form INZ 1241 if a lawyer or immigration expert is filing on your behalf. And then the rest of the things you'll need are a passport photo taken from less than 6 months ago, a police clearance form. You'll likely need to get a new one from the one that you used to apply for the first visa, and you'll also need to include any offenses that the FBI may not be aware of, which include things like driving offenses. So in the States, I had 2 minor road-related charges, which were basically like a failure to stop in front of a school bus, and then I think I rear-ended somebody. Yeah, I rear-ended somebody. So because I paid the fees for that instead of challenging any of those in court, technically that's a conviction. So you do need to include those in your information, as silly as it may sound. You will also need an e-medical tracking sheet, which is completed less than 3 months from the time you plan to submit your application. Probably do this one last. Basically, this is just a series of tests which include a chest x-ray and blood work, and also just like urine tests and, checking height, weight, all that. Basically just to make sure you're in an acceptable state of health. And this is fairly easy to complete, although it does take a little bit of time, so I would allocate about half a day to a full day to get this process done. I just did mine at the local doctor's because I live in Auckland. And they'll just send you exactly where you need to go. They know all the tests that you need to do to complete this information, so just go to somebody who knows how to do immigration-related tests, and they'll take care of you. You'll also need to obviously include some photos of yourself and your partner together. If you got any social media posts with those sorts of things, those are also really good to include. Basically, they just want to make sure that you're not like catfishing immigration as well, as silly as that sounds. But basically, they just want to make sure that your relationship's legit and you guys are actually, understood as a couple by the people in your lives. And also, as weird as this one sounds, a joint letter from you and your partner basically talking about how you handle your daily lives together and your future plans with each other. It doesn't have to be anything super long. Basically, I just wrote about like what our daily routine looks like and, our future plans, which is basically make video games and live together. That's about it. And it really doesn't need to be much deeper than that. You'll also need support letters from your family and friends. This first time around, I just got some letters from our mutual online friends, basically so long as they include their real names and addresses and phone numbers, basically just to make sure that they're real people, not just screen names. You can submit these to immigration, because if they're aware of your relationship, then that's really all that matters to immigration. And if you have bought anything big with your partner, like a car, keep the receipts for that. Also, any trips you guys have taken together. So, like, I just included our hotel information from our GDC trip that year in order to show that we had taken at least a trip together as a couple. And just like the first time you applied for your visas, you will also need to prove this time around that you're able to support yourself financially in New Zealand, just in case. So I submitted my information in November of 2023, and I did end up having my lawyer request to escalate my application with immigration in order to approve this visa before my current one ran out. So I definitely recommend starting this process sooner than I did. It does take time to approve these visas, and it also didn't help that I submitted my immigration stuff like right before the holidays started, and INZ and also my lawyer's office takes time off between like December and January to celebrate the holidays. So I will say, if you find yourself running low on your time between your current and your next visa, sometimes what happens is that an interim visa is issued while your application is being looked at. This only really happens if you've got an application like in the queue for immigration. So that is a good thing, but it also means you cannot work. You can't work on an interim visa. So it would be quite disruptive if you have a job. Luckily, I had a really good job at the time who liked me enough that they wrote a letter to help with the escalation. Like, the CFO wrote in and said, hey, like, we need her to stay so we can get work done. So really, really grateful to the CFO of the company I was working at the time to help me with that. So, but not everybody is so lucky. So try to definitely have enough time that you would not need to escalate your visa application. So, but my visa did eventually get issued in January of 2024. And because I'd also been living with my partner for less than a year when my application was submitted, this visa was only for a year. So then I had to get on the next part of this process pretty quickly. So this is the big one. The good news is immigration should now have all of your previous supporting evidence, so when you go to do your next application, you won't have to resubmit everything. So I began this process in March of 2024 and submitted my documents to my lawyer in the beginning of May 2024. And here's what you'll need to succeed. So there are 2 forms you will need to fill out for INZ, which is Form INZ 1178, which is a form your partner fills out in order to signal intent to support your residency. This one is a bit longer than the previous support form, and it also needs to be notarized. So make sure to schedule an appointment with a notary in order to complete this form. And then there's Form INZ 1242 if a lawyer or immigration expert is helping to file this on your behalf. So another thing that they'll ask for is your family information. This includes your partner, living parents, brothers and sisters, which include half, step, or adopted siblings, and any children that you have. Scans of you and your partner's passports, scanned copies of your birth certificate and any children's birth certificates if you have them, scans of any bills you have received with your partner over the last 12 months, so rates, water, electricity, internet, any of those things, those will be needed. Joint bank account statements over the last 12 months, so if you haven't gotten a joint bank account yet, now's the time to do it. Insurance documentation, so if you've got like a car, like we've bought a car during our last application, so for this application, we had proof of insurance that both of our names were on, so we're sharing that bill. And if you've gathered any more photos since your last application of you and your partner, definitely include those, and of course any social media posts. And also support letters if you've got more support letters from friends, family, etc. Those are good to include. They also asked for some with your neighbors. We are kind of shut-ins, so we don't really talk to our neighbors, so we didn't submit any, but it ended up being okay in the end. So once your application is submitted, you're not done with gathering evidence. While you are waiting for your approval for your residency visa, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take about 6 months, and anything can happen in those 6 months as far as immigration is concerned. So make sure that you are continuing to save your bills Send them to either your lawyer or add them to your evidence pile if you're doing your own application process, because immigration will ask whether or not you guys are still living together. They'll want proof that you are still living together and sharing bills, basically just to make sure that you're both still at the same address and doing the whole, living together thing. So about a month and a half from my residency being approved, immigration actually asked me for my physical passport, because obviously it's not enough to scan it. They actually need the passport to make sure that it's real. So I had to send that off. I recommend doing a courier service that's tracked, because it's important to have a passport if you are not a resident of the country. So you can just do that through New Zealand Post, which is fairly quick and cheap. And this process takes about 2 weeks to complete. They did approve it within about 3 days of me sending my passport, but it took them about a week to send the passport back. And it took also a couple extra days because the courier tried to drop off my passport to the wrong address. So that was fun. And about 2 days out from my residency visa being approved, ironically on the US election day, my partner received a phone call from immigration basically just to confirm we were still living together. And then on the 8th of November, my residency visa was approved. Yay! Well, currently I'm just looking for work, but now I'll be able to stay in New Zealand indefinitely so long as I follow the guidelines around travel. Basically just means that I need to stay in the country for at least 184 days in 2 consecutive years to gain my permanent residency, or have plans to get another visa if I plan to be out of New Zealand at the time that my residency visa expires. So after 5 years of staying in New Zealand for at least 240 days for those 5 consecutive years, I can become a New Zealand citizen and swear an oath to the crown, thus fully shedding my American skin. Can't wait. To be honest, it's a question that I don't know if I have a helpful answer for. As I said, I grew up in Virginia and I was living in Richmond at the time I left the States, which is Virginia's capital city. There's a lot of things that I really love about New Zealand. The public transport is one of the things I've been leaning the heaviest on as I've been living in Auckland. And there's also great coffee, great food, the working environments. I feel I've been really, really lucky. It's been really, really chill in most of the offices that I've worked in, and my last job was so chill that they just let me work full-time from home. The air quality feels a lot cleaner, and there are concerted efforts in city planning just to make sure that there's gorgeous sightlines all around. It's really a fantastic place to be. But I won't lie to you, it's not all glitter and sunshine. As you may have seen in recent news, there are still scars and disputes between the native population of the Maori and the more right-wing parties of New Zealand's parliament. New Zealand is, at its core, a colonialist project, but New Zealand's at least tried their best at effective reparations, unlike the US. However, I'm not an expert on this subject, so I'll leave some explainers in the notes so that you can learn more about this. The more stupid political stunts that attempt to leave Parliament are at least tempered by there being way more than 2 parties in the House, so there's a more even keel political landscape overall, comparatively. The most pressing issue is the cost of living. As mentioned before, I live in Auckland, which houses about a quarter of New Zealand's population. Per Mercer, Auckland falls at 111th and Wellington 145th in the top highest cost of living in the world. Of course, this is better than New York City or Los Angeles, but still. The biggest problem is that, like most of the world, it's difficult to find jobs that are outside of the cities, but it's especially prevalent in New Zealand when it's also, split into 2 islands and is generally pretty tiny. New Zealand also has laws about how long commutes can be, and that's due to safety. It's actually a good thing, but it also means that you can't commute a ridiculously long way in order to have a house, say, out in a rural area that's cheaper, but still have a well-paying job that's in the city. So unless you are living in a rural area that's close enough to your job that you wouldn't have to commute 2 hours to get to it. And while New Zealand's public healthcare system is a common good, it also means that there's a certain amount of ableism when it comes to immigration assessments. Over 8,000 applications were rejected for health reasons in the last 5 years, which amounts to about 4% of residency applications. And I don't know, like it's probably less than that if you put it across all application types, but still a fairly decent chunk of applications being rejected for that reason. But the reason being is that because it's a public healthcare system, so everybody buys into it. There's no opt out of it if you are covered by it. So everybody kind of has to pull their weight. It's kind of like the Social Security system. Fiscally, it makes a lot of sense, but emotionally, it does really suck, especially when you consider people who have chronic illnesses, who need healthcare in order to function as human beings. But oftentimes in the US, insurance is tied to your work. So if you're chronically ill and can't work, it becomes very expensive to try to stay healthy. So it's kind of just, if you are trying to get out of the US due to health reasons, you may not be able to if you try to go to New Zealand because of the way their healthcare system is set up. But to answer the question, in my own experience, New Zealand is fine. I enjoy my time here and I've had a fairly easy go of it with immigrating. I'm not saying that will be your experience, but it is doable. I hope this video may have helped you if you are thinking about moving to New Zealand and if you're in a similar situation to me. I definitely recommend checking out Immigration New Zealand for more information. It's a really readable site and it's got a lot of clear instructions on what you need, what the laws are, and what your path forward could look like. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Feel free to comment. And yeah, hopefully this helps. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!